Hi everyone. I haven't been posting a lot lately, so I decided to record a lesson on Rembrandt and the Aristotle. Rembrandt is a famous Dutch painter, um, and I would like to focus on the painting called Aristotle with bust of Homer. It was painted in 1653, and I will also compare the painting with uh, Otis Kaye, which I will discuss in a few minutes. So this painting is very interesting. As you can see, the composition here is that Rembrandt, painted in 1653, uses the um, interesting Alexander the Great clothing and dress, and resting the hand on um, bust of Homer. And Homer is a famous ancient poet and writer. Uh, he wrote Iliad and all that. And it's just very interesting composition. We see the richness of composition and how Rembrandt decided to paint this one. The question is that the contrast here is why use Homer and Aristotle with a bust of Homer. So we can assume that this is Aristotle. We know that Aristotle's a famous philosopher, and he also Aristotle was the tutor, or his pupil was Alexander the Great. This is an interesting composition, that to bring all these different characters together as a thinking, and then we can see the thinking subject here is uh, Aristotle, and it is very fascinating painting of to bring these different features that come together and that rest on the intellectual connection and emotional also connection, but at the same time he's thinking and resting his hand on the bust. And it's like, is there any connection between the two, Aristotle and Iliad and Rembrandt? That's an interesting question to ponder. But now um, I want to skip to the next painting, which is Heart of the Matter by Otis Kaye. And we can see that this painting, the top painting and this painting, was used to paint the same idea. But in this case, Otis Kaye, which painted in 1963, and this interesting painting is kind of reflects the all these different money and richness and all that. Now, going back to Aristotle, when he died really poor with a lot of debt. And but today's Rembrandt's paintings are outrageously expensive. I mean, in millions. And then Otis K, I think Otis K was trying to present here money as the problem that becomes an issue in during Great Depression, also, where a lot of people lose their money, as we know. And it is an interesting contrast here. We saw really rich painting here, but then we see really ripped clothing, and we see a lot of single bills, a lot of different money, and different compositions that are being used. But now let's compare between these two. And yeah, I try to put it side by side, but it's not, the best way. We can see the hand here is barely touching the head of Homer. Here we see it's clearly resting in his composition. We see a lot of money, but single bills really is the single bill really that rich? Does it represent richness? Not really. And it is an interesting thing is that here we see that Aristotle being this very rich guy and connection having connection to the poet and the thinker, but here we see more a depressing view of Aristotle with having the money problem, which in this case we know that Rembrandt, who painted this one, was having a money problem. And it is very interesting how the composition between these two, um, the bringing all these different figures, which one we know one actually dies very poor, very poor. Rembrandt dies very poor, and here we've shown all this money around hanging, ripped, very, and then we see portrait of George Washington. I mean, there's a lot of symbolism here in the power figures, and we can even see symbolism because Rembrandt here Aristotle is wearing kind of Alexander the Great's um, clothing, which Alexander the Great, we can connect that to here, George Washington, because they were the ones who led the army. I mean, we know Alexander the Great marched all the way through the Egypt. Although he lost, we know George Washington won the war, well, with the great expense, but he won war independence. And then we see a lot of different presidents here. That might be Andrew Jackson, which is an interesting figure, historical figure who enacted Indian Removal Act, and then we have Abraham Lincoln, and we know his emancipation, and then we have one, which is like a symbol. So we can see a lot of different symbols, but we can see that these all these tearings and everything that kind of it is ironic that Rembrandt dies very poor, and here he is 400 years later. This guy paints Rembrandt paintings with a lot of money around it, but ripped, and it looks like a very poor quality, and all that. So it's interesting. What message was, to me, the message that it was being sent, or to understand for us as a viewer, at least to me personally, is that it is interesting how the reverse of fortune can occur. Here, today, these paintings cost millions. When he died, he died very poor. He was not, as known as he is today. And then we have here who another Otis Kaye who painted this one and presented it in a different light with a lot of money, but a lot of ripped things and a lot of symbolism, but also shows like this is hanging in a very poor house with a lot of useless money laying around, like just hanging and all that. It's just an interesting contrast that both show like with a richness and with poorness of how the reverse of fortune plays in life and changes. Well, that's all I have today. And if you have any comments about the paintings or anything like that, let me know. Thanks.